You don't belong in the VIP section. These seats are for people who matter. You're just a charity case.
Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling of the Larkspur Regency Hotel ballroom, their light spilling like liquid gold across the polished marble floor. Every surface seemed to shine. The air carried the soft scent of expensive perfume, fresh flowers, and chilled champagne. This was the annual St. Celeste Children's Medical Center Charity Gala, an event meant to celebrate generosity, healing, and compassion. Tonight, New York's elite filled the room, dressed in tailored suits and flowing gowns, their laughter rising and falling like carefully rehearsed music. At table 12, slightly removed from the center of attention, Olivia Carter, 27 years old, sat quietly in her wheelchair. The chair's chrome frame reflected the light as much as the jewelry worn by the guests around her. She wore an emerald green dress that hugged her shoulders and arms beautifully, the fabric catching the glow of the chandeliers whenever she shifted slightly. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup soft and elegant, but despite her careful preparation she felt exposed as if the room could see right through her. Olivia rested her hands in her lap, fingers loosely intertwined. In front of her sat a simple glass of water she had not touched. Around her, the ballroom moved like a living thing. Couples glided across the dance floor, smiling for cameras that flashed without warning. At nearby tables, men leaned close to one another, speaking in low, urgent voices about stocks, mergers, and opportunities. Laughter erupted too loudly, then cut off just as fast. People scanned the room constantly, measuring faces, weighing status, deciding who mattered. Olivia watched it all from her seat, feeling like an observer in a world she no longer fully belonged to. She had learned how to become invisible. Over the past few years she had practiced making herself smaller, lowering her eyes, keeping her voice soft, staying out of the way. Tonight was no different. She adjusted her position slightly, hoping not to draw attention, hoping to simply exist without being noticed. She told herself she was here for the right reasons. This hospital mattered to her. Still, being surrounded by so much wealth and confidence made her chest feel tight. She traced the smooth rim of her water glass with one finger, grounding herself as she watched another couple pass by, their laughter effortless and unburdened. Then a voice cut through the hum of the ballroom. "Excuse me." It was sharp, loud, and impatient. Olivia looked up slowly. Standing beside her table was Brandon Whitaker, a well-known investment banker with a reputation for being as aggressive as he was successful. He wore a dark suit that looked expensive even by Gala standards. His expression was already twisted in irritation. Behind him stood several associates, men and women dressed just as finely, all wearing the same look of entitlement. "You're in my seat," Brandon said flatly. Olivia blinked, confused. She glanced down at the table, then back up at him. "I'm sorry," she said politely. "The event coordinator assigned me to this table. My name card is right here." She reached for the small folded card placed neatly in front of her. Her name, Olivia Carter, was written in elegant script. Brandon didn't even look at it. He snatched the card from her hand and crumpled it in his fist. The paper bent and tore with a soft, cruel sound. "I don't care what some minimum wage party planner wrote," he snapped. "This is the VIP section. And you clearly don't belong here." The words hit Olivia hard. She felt heat rush to her face as her breath caught in her throat. "These tables," Brandon continued, his voice growing louder, "are for people who matter. People who contribute something. Not—" His eyes dropped to her wheelchair, lingering there without shame. "Charity cases who probably got a pity invite." The ballroom seemed to slow around them. Conversations nearby faded into uneasy silence. A few heads turned. Someone stopped mid-laugh. Olivia felt every eye settle on her, heavy and judging, even when no one said a word. Her hands tightened around the armrests of her wheelchair. Her fingers curled until her knuckles turned pale. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow her whole. "I don't want any trouble," Olivia said quietly. Her voice barely carried past the table. "I can move to another seat." She tried to roll backward slightly, hoping to end the moment, hoping to escape. But the damage was already done. The humiliation burned deep, spreading through her chest and throat like fire. She could feel it rising now, the familiar ache of being seen not as a person but as something less. As a mistake. As someone who had taken up space she wasn't meant to occupy. Around her, the ballroom had gone almost completely still. People watched, frozen between sympathy and fear, unwilling to step in. Olivia could feel tears pressing at the back of her eyes, but she fought them back. She would not cry here. Not in front of them. Not tonight. Her heart pounded as she sat there under the glittering chandeliers, surrounded by wealth and cruelty, realizing that no matter how beautiful the room was, it could still become a place of quiet destruction. And the silence only made it worse. Olivia swallowed hard and forced herself to speak calmly. She had learned that staying polite sometimes softened sharp edges, even when her chest felt tight with fear. "I'm sorry," she said again, keeping her eyes lowered. "There must have been a mix-up. I can move to another table." She reached for the wheels of her chair and gently pushed backward, careful not to bump into anyone. Her heart raced, but she focused on leaving quietly, on ending the moment before it became worse. She did not get the chance. Brandon Whitaker stepped sideways, planting himself directly in front of her. His polished shoes blocked the narrow space between the tables. Olivia stopped abruptly, the wheels of her chair pressing uselessly against the marble floor. She looked up at him, confusion and fear crossing her face. "I didn't say you could just roll away," Brandon said sharply. His voice was louder now. Too loud. Heads turned. Nearby guests leaned back in their chairs, pretending not to stare while staring anyway. Brandon seemed to notice the attention and welcome it. "You people always think you can just show up wherever you want," he continued, his tone dripping with disgust. "You don't understand how uncomfortable it makes everyone else." Olivia's hands tightened around the armrests of her wheelchair. Her fingers trembled. "You're a reminder," Brandon went on, his voice rising, "of weakness, of failure, of things going wrong. People come to places like this to feel successful, not to be confronted with." He paused, his eyes sweeping over her again. "This." Each word landed like a blow. Olivia felt herself shrinking inward, her shoulders curling slightly as if she could protect herself that way. The room felt colder, harsher, despite the soft lights and elegant decor. "Please," she whispered. Her voice shook despite her effort to steady it. "Please don't hurt me." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She hated how small they sounded. She hated that fear had found its way into her voice. Her grip tightened further, knuckles whitening as she held onto the chair like it was the only solid thing left in the room. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," she said, forcing herself to continue. "I just wanted to be here tonight. I came to support the hospital." Brandon tilted his head, mock curiosity flashing across his face. "The hospital?" he repeated as if the idea amused him. "Yes," Olivia said quickly, desperate now to be understood. "The hospital helped me after my accident. They took care of me. I wanted to give back. That's all." For a moment there was a brief silence. Olivia dared to hope that her words had reached him. Then Brandon laughed. It was a harsh, empty sound, loud enough to echo across the marble floor. "Oh, that's rich," he said. "So now you're a philanthropist?" His associates behind him chuckled, encouraged by his cruelty. "Let me guess," Brandon continued, folding his arms. "You didn't actually donate anything, did you? You just showed up for the free food and the attention. Makes you feel important, right?" Olivia's face burned. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The accusation wrapped around her throat, choking her words. One of the women in Brandon's group leaned forward slightly, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Honestly, Brandon, why are we wasting time?" she said. "Just have security escort her out." The suggestion hung in the air, heavy and threatening. Olivia's chest tightened. Her breathing became shallow as she looked around the room. Dozens of faces stared back at her. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked sad. A few looked away entirely. But no one moved. No one spoke. She understood why. Brandon Whitaker held power. His influence stretched beyond the ballroom, beyond the night. People feared him. They feared what he could take away with a single phone call, a single decision. Careers, deals, futures. And so they stayed silent. Olivia felt smaller than she ever had before. Not because of the wheelchair. Not because of her body. But because the room had decided she was alone. The music had stopped playing. Even the soft clinking of glasses seemed to fade. The silence pressed down on her, making every breath feel heavier than the last. She lowered her gaze, staring at the smooth floor beneath her chair. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him that satisfaction. Brandon stood over her, tall and unmoved, basking in his control. The humiliation burned deep, spreading through her chest like a slow fire. And still no one intervened. The ballroom, filled with wealth and glitter, had become a frozen stage of cruelty, one where power spoke loudly and kindness had chosen to remain quiet. Near the far end of the ballroom, close to the softly glowing bar, Kang Min-jae stood alone with a glass of whiskey in his hand. At 35, He carried himself with a calm that felt deliberate, almost calculated. He did not laugh loudly like the others. He did not scan the room with hunger or impatience. He simply observed. The lights reflected off the crystal behind the bar, catching briefly on the sharp lines of his tailored black suit. Everything about him was controlled, from the way he stood to the way he held his glass. He did not need to demand attention. It found him anyway. People felt his presence before they understood why. Conversations near him softened without intention. Waiters passed him with extra care. There was an unspoken understanding that this was not a man to be taken lightly. Min-jae took a slow sip of his drink, his dark eyes moving across the ballroom with detached interest. Charity galas were familiar territory. He had attended many like this, all polished and beautiful on the surface, all hiding the same quiet hunger beneath. Power, status, control. Earlier in the evening, someone at the edge of the room had caught his attention. A woman at table 12. She had not been trying to stand out. In fact, she seemed to be doing the opposite. Sitting calmly in her wheelchair, hands folded neatly, she watched the room without expectation. There was no bitterness on her face, no resentment. Just quiet awareness. Composure. Min-jae had noticed that immediately. In rooms like this, people often wore masks. Confidence was exaggerated. Kindness was performed. But Olivia Carter's calm was different. It was not staged. It was practiced. The kind of composure that came from enduring something difficult and surviving it with dignity intact. Now, as Min-jae's gaze returned to her table, he saw that composure being tested. Brandon Whitaker stood over her, his body language loud and invasive. His voice carried clearly across the ballroom, sharp and cruel. Min-jae did not need to hear every word to understand what was happening. The way Olivia's hands gripped her wheelchair. The way her shoulders curved inward. The way the room had gone unnaturally quiet. Something shifted in Min-jae's expression. The detached calm drained from his face, replaced by something colder, harder. His jaw tightened slightly as he lowered his glass onto the bar with careful precision. The sound it made was soft but final. He straightened, eyes fixed on the scene ahead. Brandon was still talking. Still performing. "People like you need to learn your place," Brandon said loudly, his words cutting through the air. "You can't just insert yourself into spaces meant for." Min-jae stepped away from the bar. He moved slowly, not in a rush, not with anger that demanded speed. His steps were measured, deliberate. As he walked, something strange happened. Guests who stood between him and table 12 shifted aside without being asked. A narrow path opened through the crowd as if instinct guided them. No one wanted to be in his way. No one wanted to stop him. The chandeliers continued to glow. The marble floor remained polished and bright. Yet the atmosphere changed. Attention spread quietly, like a storm forming without warning. Brandon did not notice at first. He was too focused on his own voice, on the control he believed he held. "I think it's time you understood." To what? The words were calm. Almost gentle. But they landed with weight. Brandon stopped mid-sentence. His body stiffened as he turned sharply toward the sound, anger already flaring across his face. He was ready to lash out, to crush whoever had dared interrupt him. Then he saw who stood there. The anger drained instantly. Color faded from Brandon's face as recognition hit. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. The room seemed to hold its breath. Kang Min-jae stood a few steps away, hands relaxed at his sides, posture easy but unyielding. His expression was unreadable, his eyes steady and cold. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Everyone in certain circles knew that face. Publicly, Kang Min-jae was the CEO of Kang Global Logistics, a powerful import-export company with clean records and global reach. His name appeared in business magazines and financial reports. He shook hands with politicians. He signed contracts worth millions. Privately, the truth was far more dangerous. Min-jae was the man who controlled most of the Korean underground operations along the East Coast. He was not reckless. He did not boast. He built systems, not chaos. He had earned his position through intelligence, patience, and an unforgiving sense of consequence. Brandon knew all of this. The shift in the room was immediate. Whispers rippled quietly through the crowd. People who had remained silent moments earlier now watched with sharpened attention. Min-jae met Brandon's gaze without hostility, without warmth. Just certainty. The bully had met something stronger. And for the first time that night, Brandon Whitaker understood that the power dynamic had changed. The change in Brandon Whitaker was immediate and unmistakable. The loud confidence that had filled his voice only moments earlier collapsed under the weight of recognition. His shoulders stiffened, his posture shrinking slightly as he forced a tight smile onto his face. "Mr. Kong," he said quickly, the words rushed and uneven. "I didn't realize you were attending tonight." Kong Min-jae did not respond. He did not acknowledge Brandon's greeting or even look in his direction. Instead, he stepped past him as though he were invisible. His attention shifted fully to Olivia. He stopped beside her wheelchair and lowered his voice. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. The contrast was striking. The same man who radiated quiet authority now spoke with calm concern, his tone warm and steady. Olivia looked up at him, surprised by the sudden shift in the room and the unexpected kindness directed her way. "I'm fine," she said quickly, though her voice betrayed her. "You don't need to get involved. I was just leaving." She reached for her wheels again, determined to escape what remained of the attention. Before she could move, Min-jae placed a firm but gentle hand on her shoulder. The touch was grounding, reassuring. "No," he said quietly. "You're not going anywhere." Olivia froze, unsure how to respond. "You belong here," Min-jae continued, his voice calm but unwavering. "More than some." He straightened and finally turned toward Brandon. The warmth vanished from his expression. "Mr. Whitaker," Min-jae said evenly, "you owe this lady an apology." The words were simple but they carried weight. Brandon forced a laugh that sounded thin even to his own ears. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "This was never meant to be taken so seriously." Min-jae took a single step closer. "I wasn't asking," he said. His voice remained calm, but something dangerous lived beneath the surface now. He leaned in slightly, lowering his tone so that only those nearest could hear. "You have two options," Min-jae continued. "You can apologize to Miss Carter right now. Publicly. Sincerely. Or we can discuss your recent business dealings with Takahashi Holdings." Brandon's face drained of color. Min-jae did not stop. "I'm particularly interested in the offshore accounts you believed were hidden," he added. "The ones that don't appear on any official report." The ballroom went completely still. Brandon's mouth opened, then closed. His breathing became shallow. Everyone could see it now, the fear replacing arrogance, the certainty slipping away. "How did you?" Brandon began, then stopped himself. He knew the question was pointless. "The apology," Min-jae said calmly. "We're all waiting." Brandon turned slowly toward Olivia. His jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. "I apologize," he said stiffly. Min-jae shook his head slightly. "That's not an apology," he said. "That's noise. Try again." The silence in the ballroom deepened. Even the staff stood frozen, unsure whether to move or breathe. Brandon hesitated, then did something no one in the room had ever seen him do. He lowered himself to one knee. The sound of it echoed softly against the marble floor. He looked up at Olivia, his face tight with humiliation and barely restrained anger. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice trembling, "I sincerely apologize for my behavior. It was cruel. It was uncalled for. And it was beneath any decent human being." He paused, swallowing hard. "You had every right to be here," he continued. "I had no right to speak to you the way I did." Olivia stared at him, stunned. She could see the insincerity in his eyes. The apology was not born from remorse but from fear. Still, she understood the power of the moment. This was not about forgiveness. It was about dignity. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, steady, graceful. Brandon rose quickly, his face burning as whispers rippled through the crowd. He turned as if to leave, desperate to escape the weight of the moment. Min-jae's voice stopped him. "You and your associates will be leaving now," he said. "As for your donation to St. Celeste Children's Medical Center, don't worry. I'll cover it." He paused briefly. "Consider it the cost of cruelty." Brandon did not argue. He gathered his entourage, their earlier confidence completely gone, and hurried toward the exit. They moved quickly, heads down, avoiding the eyes now fixed on them from every direction. As the doors closed behind them, the ballroom erupted in low whispers. Conversations restarted, but nothing felt the same. Min-jae turned back to Olivia. The danger faded from his expression, replaced once again by quiet assurance. And for the first time that night, the weight pressing down on Olivia's chest began to lift. Kang Min-jae pulled out the chair beside Olivia and sat down calmly, as though nothing extraordinary had just happened. The space around them still felt charged, whispers floating through the air, but he seemed unconcerned with the attention. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said quietly. "No one deserves to be spoken to like that." Olivia nodded, still trying to steady her breathing. The tightness in her chest had not fully faded, but the worst of the humiliation had passed. "Thank you," she said. After a brief pause, she looked at him directly. "But, why did you help me?" The question was not accusatory. It was honest, confused, curious. Min-jae leaned back slightly, resting one arm along the table. His expression softened. "Because I recognize situations like that," he replied. "I know what it's like to be judged before anyone bothers to know who you really are." Olivia listened closely. "People look at me," he continued, "and they see danger, power, someone to fear. They make decisions about me before I open my mouth." He met her eyes. "People look at you and see limitation, weakness, someone to pity or dismiss." Olivia felt the truth of his words settle deeply inside her. "Neither of those things," Min-jae said, "captures who we really are." She nodded slowly. "No," she said. "They don't." There was a brief silence, not uncomfortable but thoughtful. Then Olivia spoke again. "Is it true," she asked carefully, "what people say about you and your family?" Min-jae's lips curved into a faint smile. "Which part?" She hesitated. "The business empire," she said. "And the other things." He gave a soft, almost amused exhale. "Both are true," he said honestly. "My family runs a legitimate global company. And there are parts of our history that don't fit neatly into polite conversations." He did not sound proud, nor ashamed, just factual. Olivia appreciated that. "I don't usually explain myself," he added. "But tonight doesn't feel like a night for pretending." A waiter approached their table hesitantly, holding a tray with 2 champagne flutes. His hands trembled slightly as he glanced at Min-jae. "Mr. Kong," he said nervously. "Miss Carter. Would you care for champagne?" Min-jae turned to Olivia instead of answering. "Would you like some?" She blinked, surprised by the courtesy. Then she nodded. "Yes, please." The waiter poured quickly, clearly eager to finish the task. When he left, Olivia lifted her glass carefully. "You know," she said lightly, "being seen with me might damage your reputation. I'm not exactly part of this world." Min-jae laughed, a genuine sound that softened his sharp features. "Miss Carter," he said, "I assure you my reputation can survive being seen with a beautiful woman who happens to use a wheelchair." Olivia felt warmth rise to her face. "You're very direct," she said. "I find honesty saves time," he replied. He raised his glass. "To unexpected encounters," he said. "And being ourselves." Olivia smiled and clinked her glass gently against his. "To authenticity." They drank, and for the first time that evening, Olivia felt a sense of ease settle over her. She no longer felt like an object on display. She felt like a person again. Min-jae studied her for a moment. "May I tell you something?" he asked. "Yes." "My grandmother spent 16 years in a wheelchair," he said. "She was the strongest person I ever knew." Olivia's expression softened. "She built the foundation of my family," Min-jae continued. "Not with physical strength but with intelligence, discipline, and willpower. People underestimated her constantly. They paid for it." His eyes darkened briefly. "When I see someone trying to humiliate another person the way that man did to you, it reminds me of her." He paused. "I don't tolerate that." Olivia swallowed. "She sounds remarkable." "She was," he said simply. He glanced at her again. "What brought you to the gala tonight?" Olivia took a breath. "The hospital," she said. "St. Celeste Children's Medical Center saved my life. After my accident, I spent months there. The doctors, the nurses, they didn't just treat me. They carried me through the worst time of my life." She looked down at her glass. "When they invited me tonight, I couldn't say no." Min-jae nodded slowly. "Then you were exactly where you belonged," he said. Olivia met his gaze, feeling something quiet but powerful settle between them. 2 strangers. 1 table. And a shared understanding neither of them had expected to find in a room full of glitter and judgment. Olivia held her champagne glass with both hands, letting the coolness steady her. After a quiet moment, she spoke again, her voice calm but weighted with memory. 4 years ago," she said, "a drunk driver ran a red light." Min-jae listened without interrupting. "I was on my way home from rehearsal," Olivia continued. "The impact was sudden, violent. I woke up days later in St. Celeste Children's Medical Center. I stayed there for 7 months." She paused, then added, "They saved my life." Min-jae nodded slowly. "Dr. Harrison Blake," she said, "he's the head of neurology. He still checks on me every week. Not because he has to, but because he cares." There was no bitterness in her voice. Only honesty. I'm a software developer now, Olivia went on. I build accessibility apps. Tools that help people live better, move through the world more easily. She smiled faintly. It's meaningful work. Then her smile softened. I used to be a dancer, she said. With the American Ballet Theater. The admission hung quietly between them. I can't dance anymore, Olivia added. Her hand drifted briefly toward her legs before resting again in her lap. But I still choreograph. In my head. I watch performances, listen to music, imagine movements. New shapes. New stories. She let out a small breath. I don't know why I still do it. Minjae answered gently. Because creation doesn't disappear just because circumstances change. She looked at him. I used to paint, he said. Before I took over the family business. I haven't touched a brush in 11 years. But I still see compositions everywhere. Light. Shadow. Balance. He met her gaze. We don't stop being artists. Before Olivia could respond, the orchestra began to play. A slow waltz filled the ballroom, smooth and steady. Couples rose from their seats and moved toward the dance floor. Olivia watched them instinctively, her expression a mixture of longing and quiet acceptance. Minjae noticed. Would you like to dance? He asked. Olivia turned to him, surprised. She gestured lightly toward her wheelchair. I appreciate the thought, she said, but I can't. Minjae shook his head gently. That's not what I asked. She frowned slightly. I asked if you want to. The words caught her off guard. Minjae stood and moved behind her chair. He leaned down slightly, his voice low and steady. Trust me. For a moment, instinct told her to refuse. To stay where she was. To remain safe and unseen. Instead, she nodded. Minjae began to push her wheelchair forward. Whispers followed them as they crossed the marble floor, but he did not slow down. He guided her to the center of the dance floor, where the light from the chandeliers shone brightest. Then he did something unexpected. He knelt in front of her. Their eyes were level now. He took her hands gently in his. We'll make our own dance, he said. And they did. Minjae moved her chair in slow, careful circles, matching the rhythm of the music. He lifted her hands, guiding them through soft arcs in the air. Her fingers followed the melody. Her arms traced shapes that felt familiar, remembered. Olivia laughed. Not politely. Not quietly. She laughed freely, the sound bright and unrestrained. Around them, dancers slowed. Some stopped entirely. A few smiled. Others simply watched. The movement was not traditional. It was not expected. But it was beautiful. The music swelled. Minjae turned her gently, her dress catching the light. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment and let herself feel it. The rhythm, the connection, the joy. When the music ended, there was silence. Then applause. Real applause. Warm. Genuine. Olivia opened her eyes, tears spilling freely now. These were not tears of shame. They were tears of release. Minjae wheeled her back to the table as the clapping slowly faded. Olivia wiped her cheeks, smiling through the emotion. People approached them now. Not with pity. With admiration. That was incredible, a woman said sincerely. I've never seen anything like it. Olivia nodded, still overwhelmed. Thank you. Minjae sat beside her again, calm as ever. See, he said quietly. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't standing above someone. He paused. Sometimes, he said, it's dancing with them. Olivia leaned back slightly, feeling lighter than she had in years. As the night slowly wound down, the energy in the ballroom softened. The music grew quieter. Guests began saying their goodbyes, gathering coats and exchanging final smiles. Through it all, Minjae remained by Olivia's side. They talked easily now. About art and music. About how people hide behind masks. About human nature, its cruelty and its kindness. Minjae spoke honestly about power, not as something glamorous but as something heavy. Power isolates you, he admitted quietly. You're always watching. Always calculating. Every relationship feels like a chess game. Rivals, laws, betrayals, you never truly rest. Olivia listened carefully. That sounds lonely. It can be, he said. She shared her own memories of the stage. The thrill of movement. The silence right before music began. Then she spoke of the despair that followed her injury. How the world had suddenly gone quiet. Smaller. But she also spoke of what came after. Of code, of building tools that helped others live better lives. It's a different choreography, she said. But it still feels like creating something meaningful. Minjae nodded. A different stage, he said, but the same artistry. Eventually, the signal came that the evening was ending. Min-jae glanced toward the entrance and raised his hand slightly. One of his men appeared at once. "Let me make sure you get home safely," Min-jae said. Olivia hesitated. "I already have a car service." He shook his head gently. "Allow me," he said. "And perhaps, we can also talk about how my legitimate businesses might support your work." She considered him for a moment, then smiled. "All right." Outside, the city lights glowed against the dark sky. A sleek black sedan waited by the curb. Min-jae's men assisted Olivia with smooth professionalism, making sure she was comfortable. Before she entered the car, Olivia turned to him. "Thank you," she said softly. "Min-jae." It was the first time she used his name. He smiled. "You're welcome, Olivia." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You reminded me tonight that strength doesn't have to be loud," he said. "It can be quiet, persistent, powerful." His hand rested briefly on her shoulder. As the car pulled away, Olivia looked back through the window. Min-jae stood on the steps of the hotel, still and watchful. Like a guardian. In the days that followed, he reached out to her directly. Not through assistance. Not through formality. Just a message asking to meet. They met discreetly, quiet cafes, private offices high above the city with sweeping skyline views. Min-jae listened closely as Olivia explained her work. The technology. The market. The people it helped. He asked real questions. He offered real resources. Doors opened. Olivia's accessibility apps gained attention far beyond what she imagined. She spoke publicly. She advocated openly. She stopped hiding. Their connection grew in its own quiet way, professional, respectful, unspoken. Min-jae never tried to control her. He only supported her vision. People began to talk. Quietly. A bullied woman. A feared Korean boss. Courage. Kindness. A legend formed. Olivia learned that vulnerability was not weakness. And Min-jae found purpose beyond power. And the question lingered, for anyone who heard their story. When injustice appears, do you turn away? Or do you stand up? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more interesting stories.